A couple of weeks ago, I asked you guys to send me submissions of your artwork for me to redraw for a video, so here we are. I've wanted to do this kind of challenge for a while, especially after seeing other people doing it, so I was really excited to see your guys' art, and I did not expect nearly as many submissions as I received. I would have loved to do more redraws of your art, but I did decide to narrow it down to choosing 3 pieces for this video, which was honestly really hard to do because you guys submitted so much gorgeous art. So thank you to everyone who submitted art my way, I really appreciate it. The first drawing I decided was this one from Corelzi Art, which I'm probably butchering the username, so if that is the case, I'm very sorry. I really liked how simple the background was in the original painting, and I thought I would very easily be able to recreate that because I definitely wanted to do something with a background with more than just a character going on, so as soon as I saw this one, I was really excited to do it. I also really liked the composition of the original piece with the moon in the background and everything. I just thought it was very pretty, and I knew as soon as I saw this one, I wanted to add it to my list of redraws to do. That being said though, this is honestly my least favorite out of the 3 I redrew. The reason behind that is because I didn't realize until I was done with the piece, but one of her eyes ended up looking really wonky and it just kind of ruins the piece for me. I'm really bad at like 3/4 perspective and getting the eye that's kind of behind the nose correct, and this is definitely no exception to that. But aside from the situation with her face, which kind of gets fixed in the line art, but like it still bothers me at the very end, but it's fine. Aside from that, I do like how this turned out. I tried to stay as close to the original as possible, but I did end up changing the color scheme slightly to fit a palette that I preferred. And I think the biggest change that I ended up making aside from that was getting rid of the rain and adding little dots of floating color around her instead. I don't know if they're just pieces of glowing light or fireflies, but I did not trust myself to paint a scene and make it look like it was raining, so that's why I decided to change that factor. I thought if I just tried to paint in rain, it would not look like rain, it would not look good, and it just would not turn out. Realistically, I could have used masking fluid to add raindrops, not thinking about that until now, but I do like the little kind of tiny orbs of light I added around her at the ending, so I'm not complaining about that. I did really like painting this girl as a whole though, because I wanted to do a similar concept in terms of having a girl like halfway in water and halfway peeking out, and I did definitely take this simple route and I didn't worry about painting anything underneath the water. I just made it kind of opaque water, so very much so taking the easy way out on this one. But I had a lot of fun with the whole concept of this piece, and it was really fun to paint her hair floating along top of the water. That was a very cool way that was done in the original piece, and I wanted to absolutely incorporate that in this piece. I also kind of changed how the flowers looked in the background. I really like drawing peonies and like roses and flowers along that family as a whole, so I changed them to match what I personally prefer more and what I like drawing more, and I really like how those looked. So as a whole, pretty much the biggest things I changed, like I said, were the lights and the color scheme. The biggest part of the color scheme that I ended up changing was I changed the water from like a greenish blue to just a straight up blue. I felt like it complemented everything else I was doing in the piece a lot more. I actually kind of wish that I went and did this painting in gouache instead of watercolors though, because I think it would have looked really cool in the more graphic-y style of how I normally use gouache. I wasn't super keen on using watercolors for this piece, but I actually sketched them a good amount of time before I ended up painting all of these pieces, and by the time I actually got around to doing the finished portion of these paintings, I was like, ooh, I don't really want to use watercolors, but it's in a watercolor sketchbook though, so of course that's what I ended up going with, which is fine. I do like the finished product of this piece. The only thing that bothers me is her left eye, which is the one you see on the right hand side. It just looks weird. I struggle with this a lot though, so this isn't like something that's random for me. This happens a good amount. This is how it turned out compared to the original. I think I did a fairly good job with this one, so on to the next one. For the second drawing I chose to redraw, this one is from Masha Not Misha on Instagram. She actually submitted a couple of different pieces for me to potentially redraw, and I actually almost accidentally picked both of her drawings to do for this video because I really liked the look and composition of them. They had like a very dark theme to them overall. They weren't like happy bright. Not that it's necessarily like super dark or anything, it just had a very cool feel to both of the pieces that she submitted for me to redraw. So I almost did both of them, and then I realized they were from the same person and I was like, oop, I guess I'll just pick one. So obviously this is the one I ended up picking. I was very easily drawn to the elements of this piece though. The original is such a gorgeous painting and I was really looking forward to redrawing this. I love the muted color scheme in the original painting, which is something that I didn't really capture too well on my own since I'm far more comfortable and just used to working with more saturated colors. So I tried to keep it fairly muted, but honestly it didn't really end up working out. Mine is far brighter than the original, but I'm okay with it. I still really like how this one ended up turning out. And while this painting is very simple as a whole, it still took me a good chunk of time to finish because I wanted to capture the same look in the hair as Masha had in her original, where it was very rendered, the individual strands were very prominent and just, it looks like hair kind of. I never paint any kind of detailed hair, so this was something that was not necessarily foreign to me. It was just very time consuming and not my usual standard, but I knew considering how simple the elements of the piece are aside from that hair, I really wanted the hair to kind of pop and be a more rendered sort of thing than what else is going on in the piece. Also, I never ever paint any kind of insects because I really don't like bugs, but the Death Head's moth, which is the moth that's in the center of the piece, it's such a cool addition to the painting. When I was first sketching this piece, I figured I should go off of an actual photograph of the moth instead of Masha's version of the moth because I didn't want it to be like super off from what the actual moth looked like. So somewhere along the line that got really messed up because I feel like the body of the moth is not long, the wings are too big, there's a lot going wrong with the moth itself. So the anatomy is really weird. I don't really mind in the sense of like, I don't really care if the anatomy of the moth is wrong because I don't know what this kind of moth looks like. So I only notice there's an issue when I am looking at Masha's original painting and real pictures of the moth because I'm like, my moth looks really weird. But I don't mind. I still think it looks really cool. I really like the look of the vines and the moth and just there's like a dark feeling to this piece, but it's not like a dark, I don't know. I really like the original piece. I had so much fun painting this one because I feel like it's just a very cool concept. It's very out of the realm of things that I normally paint because I normally paint like cute, bright, happy girls and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed doing this painting. It was really fun to render the hair. Like I said, very time consuming, but very fun. Aside from definitely my piece being a lot more saturated than the original and changing the placement of the vines and the moth looking a little bit off, I didn't like voluntarily change anything about this piece. I really liked the original and there was not too many design aspects that I would change. There isn't a ton going on in the original, not in a bad way or anything, it's just a very simplistic design. So there was nothing that I obviously wanted to change other than like some of the vine placement and accidentally making the moth not actually look like the real moth, but kind of like the real moth. Really didn't stray too much from the original in any of the three pieces that I ended up doing though. I did, for the most part, stay almost identical to how the original piece looked, so this one's definitely not an exception. This one, in my eyes, is the one that's closest to the original because I didn't really change anything. But the one and only time I will ever draw a bug. Third and final piece that I chose to redraw for this video is this one for Molnar Hannah 040707. This one, initially, I was kind of tempted to redraw, but I didn't want to at the same time, and that is because of the dragon, actually. I'm not a huge fan of Eastern dragons. I'm not a huge fan of like how Chinese dragons look in terms of drawing them individually. I think they look really cool on their own, but I think it's just like the hair on the face of the dragons is something that makes me not want to draw them. So when I finally decided that I was actually going to redraw this piece, my initial plan was to change the dragon into looking like a Western dragon, which is the stereotypical like Western dragon. I don't know how to explain it, but they look a lot more rough. Not that Eastern dragons don't look rough, but they don't have hair on their face. I think it's just the hair on the face. That's the thing that throws me off. But I was gonna change it into looking like a Western dragon, but I don't know, I felt like it was going so far off because I would end up changing the color scheme, I would change the way the dragon looked, etc. So many things would end up changing about this piece. So in starting sketching, I sketched the girl first, and then I moved on to the dragon. My initial plan was to change a lot of features of the dragon, but once I started drawing the hair and like the beard portion of the dragon, I kind of got into it, honestly. So I decided to go ahead and do an Eastern dragon for this piece. That being said, I was still kind of torn throughout the making of this piece because I didn't know if I wanted to change the color scheme of the dragon. I wanted to keep it red because I felt like that was a really prominent feature of it, but I was kind of debating between changing the purple on the dragon to blue and maybe changing the yellow to a different color. So I started swatching some other colors at a certain point and I just figured, nah, I'll keep it as close to the original as I can. So that's what I ended up doing. I also was really happy that I went ahead and I colored this in markers. I used the Arteza Everblend markers, which I'm still absolutely loving. I love these markers so much. I haven't touched my Copic markers in a while. I feel a lot less pressured to work with the Everblend markers because they are cheaper markers. So while I don't necessarily get the same stressful feelings of using my Copic markers as I used to, where it's like, these are really expensive, I don't want to use them. It's very nice using like a less expensive art supply. So I really had fun doing this one in alcohol markers. I felt like it complemented the illustration very well. My finished version of this drawing does look fairly different just because of how I ended up having to shift both the girl and the dragon to complement the size of the page. It's still a very similar theme, it still looks fairly similar, but just the positioning on the page is very different because of the size of sheet I was working with. But aside from that, the only changes I made were fairly small. I did add a second set of horns to the dragon when I was sketching it to give it more of a feel of a Western dragon. I really like the way that looks. I think it looks very fancy. And I also gave the dragon white eyes to match the eyes of the girl. I felt like they looked like they were parts of separate pieces and I wanted to make them look at least a little bit more harmonious. I don't know if these were original characters or if they were just something that the original artist drew, but I decided to make that little final choice and I really like how that looks. I also had a lot of fun doing the background, just the solid black color, and then I added some little specks with my Posca pens just to add something going on to the background because there was a lot of empty black space and I felt like it could use a little bit of a pop of color, and I really like how that turned out. This is probably the piece I had the most fun with, honestly. I've been really enjoying working with alcohol markers, and I really liked drawing the dragon, which is something that I didn't realize I would, especially, like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of Eastern dragons, but I had a lot of fun drawing this guy, and the girl was really cute too, so I really like how this piece turned out. So that is it for all of my 3 redraws. I had so much fun doing this, and thank you so much to everyone who submitted things for me to redraw. I would love to do this again in the future because I felt like this was just a very nice art exercise for me as a whole. It did not take a lot of creative energy on my part, and that was really fun. So if you guys would like to see this again in the future, just let me know. Aside from that though, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.